Black and white photography is not reality. The camera allows us to see the world in ways that we cannot see with our eyes. Of course, if you want to be more popular, then the color version of this photograph may well prove to be the one that people are going to strive towards. That's what I thought, certainly, but it turned out that the black and white version was the one that resonated with people more than the color version. Maybe color's just a little bit too ordinary sometimes, and people have become habituated to seeing beautiful colored photographs. And when they see a truly well-worked black and white photograph, it stirs something in their own imagination. These are some of the reasons that I think are the driving forces for most people making photographs: acceptance, validation, ego, reputation, and of course, if you're a professional photographer, making money. And really, the first step of how to be truly creative is to ask yourself that question: why are you making photographs? And be honest with yourself. I think that's the ground zero of creativity, is to understand yourself, your drive, your motivation, and what it is that makes you go out into the landscape or whatever environment to make your photographs. I can't tell you why you do it, but I can certainly help to give you some background as to why I do it. And like I said, I have come up with an entire system of creative engagement that is very different from the norm, and this is what I aim to share with you today. I think what's important when we deal with creativity is to understand the difference between a technical failure and a creative failure. Now, failure is not a word I like to use terribly often, but obviously images that are badly executed seem to be quite obvious, whereas a composition that you really like that somebody else doesn't like doesn't mean it's a failure. It doesn't mean it's bad. To cut a long story short, I spent the next decade or more studying everything I possibly could about composition. I read every book. I was studying up to a master's degree level in fine art and composition, understanding all of these rules and guidelines that people had been teaching and talking about for decades. I went into the Gobi Desert for the first time, and without getting into too much detail, I had been suffering a lot from depression and anxiety, and I went into the Gobi Desert to really try and change that. And what I found was that by not thinking about making photographs in a very repetitive way, it allowed me to just notice the things in the landscape that caught my eye, whether it was the light or the contrast or the angles or the quality of the light. Whatever it was, there was something in the landscape that was catching my attention. And I found that on different days and at different times, I would take photographs that were very, very different. Some were dark, some were somber, some were very angular. And on other days, I was taking images that were softer and more gentle and almost sensual. And I began to join the dots and realized that I had an emotional spectrum that went from dark to light. I could embrace the darker side of my personality, or I could embrace the light-hearted, laugh a moment kind of jocular Scottish guy. And I sat down in the middle of 2017 and started to analyze, well, what is it that makes me want to point my camera at things? Why is it on one day I want to photograph one thing, whereas on another day I want to photograph something else? And this is when I came up with the 5 triggers of engagement. And that is what we're going to explore in the first module of this course.